Hello, my name is Russell Holtz, and I'd like to tell you about the training program I've developed for students pursuing their private pilot certificate in gliders. I believe that reducing the amount of time and money it takes a student to get their certificate by increasing the efficiency of our training will help to bring more people into our sport, which will make clubs healthier and commercial operations more profitable. One of the comments I hear from students all over the country is that they feel their instruction is sometimes unstructured, inconsistent, or even haphazard. They say they often don't know where they are in their training, and they feel that time and money are wasted because of inadequate record keeping. I believe that the high cost of training at some commercial operations and the slow pace of training at many clubs are major roadblocks to bringing more people into the sport of soaring. I've developed my training materials to ensure that all students are provided with a structured, comprehensive, and efficient training experience. I've also developed methods of measuring and tracking a student's progress so both the student and the instructor know exactly where they are in the training process. My program is comprised of 3 components: my knowledge training book, the Glider Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, my flight training book, the Flight Training Manual for Gliders, and my progress tracking materials. I made sure that the Glider Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge covers all the subject areas required by the FARs and gives a student all the information they need to know to pass the FAA written test and the oral portion of the practical test. I also cover material that will prepare the student for flying cross-country, including what they'll need to know to pass the SSA Bronze Badge written test. However, I don't stop there. I believe that to be a safe pilot, students need to know more than just how to pass a test. I present the material in a logical order with plenty of clear, simple drawings to provide students with a deep understanding of the material and a working knowledge of the concepts involved. The Flight Training Manual for Gliders covers all the flight maneuvers or tasks that the student needs to learn. For each maneuver, there's a separate lesson that describes the purpose of the maneuver, how to perform it, the common errors that students often make, as well as a completion standard. This format follows the FAA recommendation for the organization of lesson plans, eliminating the need for instructors to create their own lesson plans from scratch. In any training program, but especially one with multiple instructors, it's crucial that accurate records are kept for all students so that efficient use is made of both the students' and the instructor's time. I developed both knowledge and flight training progress records, written knowledge tests, and flight check plans so that instructors can easily measure and record a student's progress. These also allow the student to know exactly where they are in their training and what they need to study to prepare for their next lesson. I'll describe their progress records in more detail later. For the purpose of tracking a student's progress, I divide the training into 3 phases. In Phase 1, the student learns the skills and knowledge required to perform basic flight maneuvers in benign conditions. When a student completes Phase 1, they'll be able to fly an entire flight, all without input from the instructor. In Phase 2, the student learns more advanced flight skills that allow them to safely deal with more challenging weather conditions, as well as emergency situations. They also learn more about the airspace system, weather, regulations, and hone their judgment. At the completion of Phase 2, a student is ready to take their first solo flight. In Phase 3, the student completes the required number of solo flights and practices performing all the maneuvers to the standards set by the FAA. When the student is done with Phase 3, they're ready to take the practical test. I recommend that an instructor other than the student's primary instructor conduct a phase check with the student upon the completion of each phase. The phase check consists of a written test and 1 or more flights. The purpose of the phase check is to verify the student's progress in both knowledge and flight training, identify any areas of weakness that the primary instructor may have missed, get the student familiar with the extra pressure of a check ride, and to provide the student with a sense of accomplishment. I've developed written knowledge tests for each phase. The Phase 1 test covers basic knowledge about the glider, aerodynamics, and the instruments. The Phase 2 test functions as the pre-solo test required by the FAA and covers all the required material. The Phase 3 test covers the material that the student will need to know to pass both the FAA written knowledge test and the oral portion of the FAA practical test. I've also developed flight plans for confirming that the student has the appropriate skills at the end of each phase. The flight plans ensure that all instructors are teaching to the same standards and are covering all the required materials so that nothing falls through the cracks. They also document that the student has received the required training and perform the maneuvers at an appropriate level of proficiency. I put together a document titled Phase Check Guidelines, where you can find more information about the phase checks. That document, as well as the written tests and flight plans, are available to download for free in the Download section of the GLIDERBOOKS.com website. Now let's take a closer look at the Glider Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. Inside the front cover of the book is a progress record that the student can use to keep track of their advancement. Each chapter is represented, as well as the individual sections within the chapter. Notice how the separate sections are grouped by training phase on the left. These sections are part of Phase 1, these Phase 2, and these Phase 3. You can see that some chapters are split between more than one phase. Next is the Contents at a Glance page, which makes it easy to find a specific chapter in the book. The full table of contents lists each section and subsection of the chapters, making it easier to find a specific piece of knowledge that you may need to reference. For example, if you can't remember if an airworthiness certificate has an expiration date, you can look in the chapter on glider familiarization in the documentation section and then in the subsection on airworthiness certificates. And this is a good time to mention that you can also look up the airworthiness certificate in the index. The book is fully indexed, and I made sure I used both layman's terminology as well as the sometimes more perplexing FAA terminology in creating the index. I also included a glossary of common terms, again using the FAA definitions where applicable. And finally, there are review questions for each section of each chapter gathered at the back of the book. For convenience, these pages are a different color from the rest of the book. The review questions are a combination of questions taken from the FAA Airman Knowledge Test Question Bank and original questions that I wrote. Once the students have read the material, they can answer their review questions to verify that they understand the key concepts. The lesson number is listed at the bottom of the page so that you can quickly find the questions you're looking for. Once the student has completed the questions, they can turn to the very back and use the answer key to check their answers. Now let's take a look at the flight training manual for gliders. Each chapter in this book covers a certain stage of flight, such as takeoff, tow, in-flight maneuvers, etc. The chapters are divided into individual lessons that cover one task or maneuver having to do with that stage of flight. Again, there's a progress record that the student can use to keep track of their advancement at the front of the book. It lists every lesson that's covered in the book. You can see here how the lessons are grouped according to the stage of flight, starting with tasks that are performed on the ground, either before or after flight. Next are takeoffs, aerotow, and in-flight maneuvers, and the progress record continues on the other side of the page. Notice how the separate maneuvers are again grouped by training phase on the left. Here are Phase 1 maneuvers, Phase 2 maneuvers, and Phase 3 maneuvers. Most of the chapters include tasks from more than one phase of training. Next is a table of contents. Again, notice how the chapters are based on the stage of flight, while the lessons cover individual tasks or maneuvers and correspond to the items on the progress record. And just like the other book, there are review questions for each lesson in the grade pages at the back of the book and an answer key so the student can check their work. As an example of how a lesson is laid out, let's look at the lesson on crosswind landings. The lesson includes the purpose of the maneuver, how to perform the maneuver, common errors, and a completion standard. The completion standards are based on the FAA's proficiency standards for the private pilot certificate. If you'd like to take a look at some sample pages from either of the books, the first several pages from each chapter can be viewed on the GLIDERBOOKS.com website. In addition to being available in hard copy, both books are also available in online versions. Finally, I want to go into more detail about the progress tracking materials of my program. I'll start out with the flight training progress record. The color version of this record is designed to be printed on cardstock and then folded in half so that it can easily fit in your back pocket or in the storage pocket of a glider. The flight training progress record allows the instructor to keep track of what the student has been assigned to read and if they've completed the assignment, if the student has completed the review questions, if an instructor has reviewed the material with a student, if the task or maneuver has been demonstrated to the student, the skill level at which the student is performing, if an instructor has shifted responsibility for the task or maneuver to the student, and if the student is performing the task or maneuver at the level of proficiency required to pass the practical test. When I assign a lesson for the student to read in the Flight Training Manual for Gliders, I circle the Read and Questions box on the progress record and have the student do the same thing on the progress record in the front of their book. Once the student has read the material and answered the review questions, I check off these boxes. When I've reviewed the material with a student and answered any questions they might have, I mark the instruction box. After I've demonstrated the lesson, I mark the demo box. Now the skill levels require a bit more explanation. When a student can notice and understand the errors they're making, but can't successfully correct them, they're at skill level 1. When a student notices errors and can take the appropriate action to correct them, but may under or overcorrect or be late in applying the controls, the student is at skill level 2. When a student notices errors and consistently takes immediate and effective corrective actions, they've achieved skill level 3. At this point, the instructor should inform the student that they are now responsible for performing this task or maneuver when appropriate. And finally, before signing off a student to take the practical test, the instructor should check to make sure they're performing at the proficiency level specified by the FAA. Now I want to show you a couple more ways that I use the flight training progress record. Here, you can see that the student has read, answered the review questions, received instruction, and seen a demonstration of shallow and medium turns. The student is performing at level 1, meaning that they can tell their turns aren't coordinated or that the pitch isn't staying constant, but they can't yet correct it. Since I want to make sure that we practice this maneuver, I circle the next level to remind myself that this is one of the first things I want to do once we get off tow. While in the air, I can easily mark off the boxes as the student progresses. If there's something I want to make sure to debrief the student on after the flight, I'll make a mark in the margin to remind myself. Now I want to talk about the inside of the flight training progress record. Here there's room for the student's name and basic contact information, and a couple of lines to note any previous aviation experience they may have, as well as their age and weight. Then I have lines to keep track of important dates, such as when the student started their training, when they completed Phase 1, when they obtained their student certificate, and when they completed their pre-solo test. There's a solo statement for the student to sign, acknowledging that they've received the required training and that they don't have any medical conditions that would keep them from safely piloting a glider. Next, there's a line to record the date the student completes Phase 2 and takes their first solo flight. You can record the date when you sign the student off to take the FAA written test and the score they got on the test. Next, there are 10 boxes so that you can keep track of the number of solos that the student has completed. And then a line to record the date when you sign off the student to take the practical test and the date the student is issued their certificate. By recording this information on the student's training record, you'll be meeting all of the FAA record-keeping requirements for instructors. Because all the information is in one place, it's easy to make sure that no steps are missed and all of the student's training is documented. And finally, notice that there's a space to keep track of the requirements and completion dates of the SSA A, B, C, and Bronze badges. The Knowledge Training Progress Record doesn't require quite as much explanation as the Flight Training Record. Here, there are boxes to keep track of when the student has read the material, answered the review questions, and for when you've instructed the student on the material. When the student has a sufficient grasp of the material to be ready to take the written and practical tests, I mark the section as complete. Just like with the Flight Training Progress Record, when I assign homework to a student, I circle it here and also have them circle it in the progress record in their book. One last thing I want to point out are the sections marked with this symbol. If your student is a transition pilot, these are the only knowledge areas that you are required to cover by the FAA. Thank you for watching this video. If you're a new instructor or training to become one, and you're looking for a complete training package to use with your students, or if you're an experienced instructor or a club or a commercial operation interested in improving the quality of your instruction, standardizing your training program, or decreasing the amount of time and money it takes to train a student, then I hope you'll consider using my training program. You can contact me at russell@gliderbooks.com with any questions, or if you'd like assistance in implementing my program at your club or commercial operation. I also invite you to check out my Mach 0.1 Glider Cockpit Simulator and my online courses at the GLIDERBOOKS Academy.